Hello there, ladies and gents, and welcome to Not One for Neutrals. Now, I am joined by Championship royalty himself, BenHD, today. I really appreciate you stopping by and joining us, Ben.
It's always a pleasure. Always happy to chat some Championship football, especially at this stage of the season when everyone's quite optimistic for their chances.
So, I want to know from you which teams have got absolutely no chance of getting into the playoffs and they're way too good for going down.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I do think down at the bottom, there's a chance that Watford or Preston could get dragged into that scrap this season. So I probably wouldn't chuck them into it yet. I think the teams for this area that I'm looking at the moment, I'm looking at Stoke, who I think have been pretty proactive during the window so far. I think they'll have way too much to go down. I still don't see them bridging that gap, though, from where they finished last season and getting into the top eight. I'm looking at QPR for probably similar reasons, making slight upgrades. I think they'll make steady progress from last season. But again, I think it'll be a very tough division in at the top end of the Championship. Probably would chuck Sheffield United maybe into there. Maybe we'll wait and see what business you guys do between now and the end of the window. West Brom, another potential that I'd throw into that bracket. And maybe even a bit of a curveball, but I quite like Cardiff at the moment. I know they've not been that proactive during the window so far, but I think they're coming up with a squad which is already pretty strong. A lot of youthful players who will continue to develop. I think they've got a good head coach. So maybe a bit of a curveball because I think they could be involved in a bit of a scrap at the bottom, but someone who I could see maybe of the three coming up from League One, maybe bridging that gap into mid-table.
Obviously, Wrexham and Birmingham are two teams that are on everyone's lips quite often because of the sort of takeovers and the owners and the American investment. I feel like this season for Wrexham, they might actually go backwards for the first time. Not backwards as in like in terms of where they are as a club, but I feel like the league is going to be so strong that last season, if they'd have nicked into those playoffs as they nearly did, look what happened with Hull City. I think last season they had a way better chance than this season of getting promoted.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I definitely think that like Wrexham are one of the sides that massively benefit from the playoffs being expanded, seventh and eighth, because it is that sort of region, seventh to tenth, that I think Wrexham probably will be floating. Where I see the upside to Wrexham is this is probably like the first summer transfer window in the last like 4 years where they've not had to completely overhaul the squad. Like if we think about previous transfer windows, they've constantly had to completely overhaul and making their squad ready for the next division. They're working with a really good group of championship players now. I think that Parkinson proved a few people wrong last season. So they're in a position where they probably only need to add like two or three quality starters, and that'll be that for them. Because I think they've been quite slow in getting a lot of business done so far, certainly in terms of previous years. But I think that's them maybe working from a position of strength. Birmingham are an interesting one. I'm really torn on Blues at the moment because I think a lot of us were guilty of overhyping them last season. I certainly was. I think I predicted them to finish in third or something like that. I do think that maybe something that could work in their favour is expectations. I think both internally and externally have probably come down a little bit, and that could just help them maybe not having as many eyeballs on them. Where I've still got that doubt about them is whether or not last season was Chris Davis taking that Blues squad as far as he could get, as far as he could take them, and whether or not they just need that next manager to come in to take them to the next level, maybe. Because like Birmingham, I think as late as April, we're down about 16th in the league, and I think they went on a good run in their final five matches. But I think it was those five matches that probably saved Davis's job. So he's someone who I'm looking at thinking you probably need to get off to a good start. Otherwise, I could maybe see Blues looking to make a switch in that area.
Yeah, that it's funny you should mention that because I was going to kind of segue backwards, if you like, to talking about Phil Parkinson because I feel like Phil Parkinson is always maybe 4 to 8 games away from the sack, and that's nothing down to him. It's more down to the fact that it feels like Wrexham are waiting for that moment. Obviously, they love him. He's done incredible work for them. But I remember when we got promoted with Bolton, he was the Bolton manager. And I'm thinking, oh, he's not going to be good enough for the Championship at Bolton. And that was 2017, I think it was. Phil Parkinson is a Championship manager right now. They can pretty much pick and choose anyone they want in this Championship, more or less, bar sort of
Yeah.
West Ham and, Wolves. So why can't they just go and get a manager that's got a lot more, not more experience, because obviously I know Phil Parkinson's got loads of experience, but more Premier League experience, more experience in getting teams promoted to the Premier League. Do you feel Phil Parkinson is kind of always sort of on a knife edge, his job?
Yeah, I definitely felt that last season. I think I'm a bit cooler on him coming into this season. I think because he proved that he could get Wrexham punching in that part of the division. Like, I was definitely the same opinion as you last season. I thought that a slow start for Wrexham, and that'll be that. Chop him and change him, and they'd look to get some swanky Premier League manager in through the door. I think that where Parkinson is probably a bit underrated is something I always come back to. I don't think Parkinson is necessarily an amazing Championship manager, where I don't think you could put him into a QPR or a Preston and maybe back him to do particularly well. But I think he's very well suited to Wrexham. I think he's very good at being a man manager. I think he always has a nice blend with the squad every year. I think he's got to deal with a lot of egos, how big that Wrexham squad was last season to keep people on side when they're not always playing. And you never really hear too many of those stories breaking about players being unhappy at Wrexham and stuff like that. So I think he's a good overall manager. And with the right coaches around him, I think that's where Wrexham maybe look to upgrade as they go through the leagues and get Parkinson that right support. But it's an interesting one. But like, looking from the outside in, I'd probably say that Davis at Birmingham is under more pressure going into this season than Parkinson at Wrexham is.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Going into sort of like the bottom three and those teams that are going to be scrapping for points and survival, who do you see down there? Because I hate saying the three teams that have gone up are going to go down. I hate that. And I always throw in a curveball there and say, oh, they're going to stay up. And I did Portsmouth the other year, and luckily, but I think I said they were going to finish like mid-table or something like that. I went a bit crazy, but Portsmouth obviously managed to stay up that season. Out of the three, I think you've already alluded to Cardiff, thinking that they're going to stay up and do a lot better than a lot of people think. But who do you see really struggling next season?
Yeah, it's always a difficult one at this stage, because I think what makes the world of difference to clubs at the bottom of the Championship is, can you get one or two quality loanees in from a Premier League club? And obviously that comes at the back end of the window, and that can absolutely make all of the difference. But looking at current squad strengths, I still think like Lincoln and Bolton in particular, coming up from League One, have still got a hell of a lot to do. I think obviously Lincoln, the preparation for this season wasn't ideal with Skabala leaving for Bristol City. I think they've had some nice pickups so far, but there's still so much to do. You then turn to look at Bolton, where I think most of the focus during this summer so far has been on beefing up that back line, where I think they are looking a bit stronger. But they were the lowest scoring Bolton of the three coming up from League One, and they're yet to address any of those forward positions. I think they're looking weaker, if anything. They've no longer got Cozier Dewberry, Johnny Kenny, although they're trying to get him back, and a few others. So, yeah, those two, just for that lack of goals at the moment, I think stand out to me straight off the bat. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I agree. I think those two will finish bottom two. I think Bolton's. I don't know. There's something about Bolton. Maybe it's me thinking about Sam Allardyce and JJ Okocha from back in the day, and having a bit of that. But on paper, they don't seem like, unless they're going to do business really, really late, they don't seem like a team that's going to be pushing towards mid-table. But obviously, three teams go down. There's a lot that are in and around there. Obviously, Bolton are a Lancashire team. Blackburn, could they be sucked into the bottom three after a poor season last season?
Yeah, I think of the survivors from last season, they're probably the ones that we're honing in on at the moment, because I know that mathematically it was West Brom just above that dotted line, but I think people see more of an upside with the Baggies this season, certainly in terms of like the underlying numbers towards the back end of last season. I think where Blackburn are going to really struggle is, don't get me wrong, I think they made a solid managerial appointment getting Tony Mowbray back, but come the end of the summer transfer window, I think very real possibility that Blackburn have spent the least of any club, and I'm including Lincoln and Bolton in that equation. Transfer activity has been really slow so far. The squad's not any stronger than it was last season. If anything, I think they're a bit weaker because some of the players that they've missed or lost. And yeah, just for some of the ones that could still move on as well, we've got rumours that Toth, their goalkeeper, who I think was a good shot stopper last season, he's now entering the last year of his contract. Rumours about him potentially moving on. Midfield's looking quite threadbare at the moment. Like the argument I'd make with Blackburn for potentially surviving, I think that if Mowbray's able to get their fully fit 11 guaranteed out for the season for 46 games, he can do something with that. But squad depth is just looking so thin at the moment. And in a league as grueling as the Championship, when you're down at the bottom scrapping, it's inevitable that those injuries will pick up. So unless they really pull something out of the bag in the transfer window, like they still could, and like a Bolton or Lincoln could, you're probably looking at them at the moment thinking, yeah, there's concerns there for sure.
Yeah, and we spoke on Sheffield United Way talking about Sheffield United, which will have already gone out by the time this comes out, so go over and check it out. And we said about Chris Wilder being, having that Sheffield United having that Chris Wilder factor, and the fact that Chris Wilder very, very if he has a poor season, it's usually mid-table. He's not really kind of had to scrap around for points at the bottom of the league. Not since I've known him as a Sheffield United manager. Tony Mowbray, he is a very, very experienced Championship manager, and like you said earlier, there might be some stock in the fact that Tony Mowbray might be able to do something with that Blackburn squad, whether they get more players in or not. I'm sure every team will sign at least one more player before, the end of the window. Let's throw in there Portsmouth, Charlton. I thought there was another one, but let's throw those two in there. Cardiff, I guess. Where do you
Yeah.
see those three finishing? I know you spoke about Cardiff a little bit more, but I'm sure, there's a lot of people that are going to be putting Cardiff down there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the pecking order for those sides at the moment, probably most fearful for Charlton out of those three that you've just read out, just for lack of firepower last season. I know they've looked to address that, bringing in Carl and Grant. They brought Ali in. I just see them drawing so many games next season and getting enough like scrappy 1-0 wins that are going to get them over the line. Like I struggle to see Charlton finishing below 48 points. I think they'll average at least 1 point per game. And obviously, you could get a high tide where Charlton are then sucked into that bottom three because of that. But they're one of those that I think will be scrapping, but will probably just about have enough quality to keep their head above water. Then you look at a Pompey. I think they've got quite a bit of upside. Again, it's just down to injuries. I think we've had 2 seasons in a row now where they've been decimated by injuries. So you start to look into, is there some underlying problems there? Is it training methods? Do you just have a bit of an injury-prone squad? Because I think, unless you're a Southampton fan, I think everyone quite likes Portsmouth, really. I think they play some nice stuff. I think they've got a good gaffer in John Musinho as well. But just for budgetary constraints, maybe you'd throw them in that picture again, especially if they do rack up a few injuries.
Yeah, just mentioning about the high tide of points. I've not done too much research on this, but I think we're all expecting West Ham to amass quite a few points, as you said earlier on, about 90 plus. Um, all I can imagine is if these clubs right at the top and it's it's going to be a really, really good championship, very high quality championship with all the money being spent and the great players that are in the championship next season. Does that mean that the bottom sort of 5 or 6 are going to be on not a record low points, but does that mean that the points total is going to be a bit lower than it usually is?
I think the biggest factor for how the relegation zone finishes in terms of points is how strong mid-table is. I think that's the biggest factor. I think if we're going to get this big squeeze of loads of teams being involved, that obviously could be the case. If those mid-table teams are pushing more towards the top and they're beating the ones at the bottom week in, week out. Maybe the other, but I think it's the strength of mid-table that's going to be very telling in that because, yeah, like you say, at the top of the table, I do think we're going to get some pretty high points tallies. It's just where those other points go. Is it the bottom end of the table or is it into those teams in mid-table?
To me, it feels like mid-table are going to be scrapping for every single point because of the playoffs being lowered to eighth place. So yeah, we could really see a really low points tally towards the bottom. Not Sheffield Wednesday low, obviously. We could see third and fourth bottom, sorry, being quite low, because I do feel like a lot of those teams in and around mid-table with 4, 5, 6 games to play could be within touching distance of that eighth spot. So yeah, we could see that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's like worth flagging up as well. I mean, I know Southampton are obviously starting on a -4, but they're not going to be anywhere near the relegation zone, I don't think, come the end of the season. So we've had a few seasons now where there's been almost one side written off before it's began, or point deductions have had some sort of influence on who's gone down in the end. Doesn't look like we're going to have any of that as things stand. That obviously could change throughout the season. So that'll have an influence as well. And I mean, a big factor will be if there is going to be someone that's rooted to that 24th spot and there's going to be an obvious weak side that gets cut adrift from the rest. I think that will impact how many points it takes to stay up as well.
Yeah, you just mentioned Southampton. This will be my last point because we've been through practically the whole table. But Southampton were fantastic at the end of last season. I saw Southampton, Sheffield United, and Norwich all kind of jump up together. It felt like there were 3 points between each of them, and we were going up like that. And then obviously the blades dropped.
Yeah.
And Norwich and Southampton kept going, and obviously keeping the manager, as much as they're going to get the Mickey taken out of them most of the season for Spygate. I think that's huge that they've kept the manager, because they were so good, and they've obviously added Lewis Dobbin to the squad as well, haven't they?
Yeah, the back end of last season, obviously, after they did get kicked out of the playoffs, I was quite fearful for Southampton. I thought, God, what's going to happen here? We had those brief stories coming out about players potentially looking to sue the club and stuff like that. And I thought, my God, this could all absolutely implode on itself. But credit to the club. I mean, they will probably be the pantomime villains of the Championship for this upcoming season, but the business they've been able to do, the players they've been able to retain so far. I know that Ross Stewart's left. It looks like Shea Charles is probably on his way out, but they still have one of the 4, 5 strongest squads in the league right now, keeping hold of Casper Yander, Taylor Harwood-Bellis, Leo Cienza, making Daniel Peretz permanent, Kyle Larin as well, like you say, adding Lewis Dobbin to the mix. It's an interesting one, that -4, because it makes you think, can they still mix it with those auto chases if it is going to be like a 90 sort of threshold to get in there? But like playoffs minimum, I think is the aim for them this season. And I think rightly so with that squad they've got. But like the form in the second half of the last season, I think if you extrapolate that over a full season, they'd have been on target for 100 points. So that sort of speaks to the levels they can reach.
Yeah, and how bad they were at the start of the season. It is crazy to think that,
Yeah.
they were on that trajectory for 100 points. Yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
mad. As we were talking about all these teams, when you mentioned Southampton, I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about Southampton. They were so good last season, and I'm sure they're going to go really, really good again. But Ben, thank you very much for joining me this evening. It's been really fun. Obviously, I've got a baseline championship knowledge. I feel like I know the championship well, but when I hear you speak and Benjamin Bloom speak, and the real championship OGs, it does make me feel like, oh, I've learned something. So hopefully the audience out there have learned a little bit more about the championship and the teams that we're going to be coming up against, and obviously the players that are going to light it up. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me, mate. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, mate.